Right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this month's Deep Read conversation with Jeremy Lent, author of The Web of Meaning. Now, it's an absolute honour to have Jeremy here. I've followed his work and read both of his books, Patterning Instinct, the one that came before this, and The Web of Meaning. And this one just blew me away. And it fitted so perfectly coming along at the same time as we did Braiding Sweetgrass. So there's so much crossover and cross-reference between the two. The timing just felt right. And especially, I loved that it landed on Black Friday, so we could invoke the Wendigo as both as Jeremy and Robin do, to talk about consumerism and all those ills in society. Let me bring Jeremy in. Hello, Jeremy. Thank you for joining us.
Hey there. Hey there, Tim. Really good to be here with you today.
Oh, thank you for being here. Tell us, where are you, Jeremy?
Oh, I'm in Berkeley, California. So I think like 8 hours earlier than you guys there in England.
Oh, well, it's good. It's very good to have you at the start of your day and
right, exactly.
And ours.
Exactly.
So for those of you who don't know, maybe you've not had a chance to catch up with the book, maybe you don't have the book. Jeremy is an author and speaker whose work investigates the underlying causes of civilization's existential crisis and explores pathways towards a life-affirming future. And for me personally, for all the challenges that we face in the world, it does feel like an exciting time as we're getting to the point where we're starting to as I've termed it quite a while back, the pendulum is starting to swing away from the great disconnect and back towards the great reconnect. And I think that's all of Jeremy's work is about that. And it's so exciting to see indigenous spiritual knowledge being melded together with scientific knowledge. And the fascinating thing is that all of that often seems to happen in the outdoors. You know, a lot of us use our time out there to think about our place in the world and what we're doing. And even in Jeremy's book, The Web of Meaning, he talks about the importance of unconscious thought and going for a walk to work things through. Right. So we'll get onto that. We've got so much to fit in. We've got an hour to fit it in. I want you guys to be able to feed in as well. So please feel free to feed in questions. There's no Q&A at the end. Just throw your questions into the chat as we go. It's going to be a bit of a ramble. We'll see where we get to. There's no way we can do the book justice. So we'll cover as much of it as we can. And I'd rather go a bit deeper in conversation than skate over lots of topics.
Sure. Yeah.
But Jeremy, I know you've been on you've got quite an interesting journey and life story yourself, because you went from being a .com entrepreneur to a leader in new ecological wisdom, I guess. What George Monbiot calls one of the greatest thinkers of our time. How did you go from that tech world in .com to being where you are?
Yeah. Well, I did go through like a kind of a total meltdown in my life about halfway, sort of midway through my life. I guess if you want to be dismissive, you could call it like the midlife crisis or whatever. But it felt like something very unique too. But I spent the first part of my life, just like you say, actually in business. And even though I actually grew up in England, and like when I was an undergraduate at Cambridge, I was totally rejecting the whole mainstream thing. I actually lived in a squat in Cambridge for a year or two while I was completing my degree and all that stuff. But then I left England, I came to the States, and I took a turn. I married somebody who had actually been like a hippie in an earlier time of her life, but she wanted to raise her two sons, who became my stepsons, kind of give them the best opportunities, all that stuff. I went into business, got an MBA, and I actually started an internet company during that first .com period, like you say. But then everything crashed around me. In fact, my wife, at the time, she passed away some years back. She became very sick, and the company, actually, I had taken it public. It was a big success. But then I left it to look after her. And then the company collapsed. And then she began to go through kind of borderline dementia. So I looked after her for a number of years, but I even sort of lost her. So it felt like everything I built in my life was collapsing around me. And that was when I said, whatever I do with the rest of my life, I want it to be truly meaningful. But I had no idea what meaning actually was. So I started this whole deep investigation. And it wasn't, the idea wasn't at first to write books about it, but I was trying to like not take anything for granted, and all these kind of concepts that we just hear around us, whether it's God or humanity or nature or just any big concept. I wanted to find out what it actually was. So I started reading and reading and reading and going back in time through history and across different disciplines. And I was looking for some sort of map. And I ended up not really finding that. So at some point, as I was doing this, I was figuring, well, let me like create and start to make notes and turn this into a book for other people who are interested in these ideas. And these two books, the first one called The Patterning Instinct, which is like almost like a history of humanity's search for meaning. And that one you just mentioned, The Web of Meaning, which is really my own sort of weaving together of the different great traditions of the world with modern science. That was the outcome of these years and years of research. And it wasn't just intellectual research. Just like you say, it was discovering myself in a deeper way. And that meant things like discovering Buddhist practices and meditation, and learning traditional Chinese embodied practices, and being in nature, and really feeling into a whole different sense of what that was. Because actually, growing up in England, I was one of those kids sort of growing up in the suburbs in Northwest London. Like, it's as if when you go outside, it was like the sun was a big light bulb, and the sky was some really nice blue wallpaper. It was like I had no conception of what it was to be like in the natural world, to be part of nature. So that's a lot of what I started to uncover over the years.
And what sort of experiences did you do to immerse yourself in the natural world? Was it, hiking? Did you go off to the rainforest? What were you doing?
It was pretty much, it was hiking in particular. And just as I was going through that meltdown I was describing, I did like, a little bit like Thoreau did on Walden Pond. Like there was this place close to where I live, which is appropriately enough called Phoenix Lake, which is a perfect name.
Very fitting.
And it was, where I live in Northern California, we're very fortunate because there's beautiful sort of semi-wilderness quite close by, just with not far to drive. And I went through this thing. It wasn't planned like this, but I started to go every week to go this walk around this lake, which is about an hour's walk. And I started to realize I was doing it each week and feeling into the different seasons. And it's like I began to deeply bond with this this space, the whole space. And there was one particular manzanita tree that it was almost like dying. It was like a tree you wouldn't even notice as you were walking by. It looked so wizened and small. And for some reason, maybe the trauma I'd been going through, I connected with it so deeply, and was kind of partly hollowed out in some ways. And I'd actually take little gift to the tree. I'd pick up something else in the lake and bring it and drop it into the sort of hollowed out part of the trunk. And actually was so I was also, as I was discovering mindfulness meditation, I was also applying that to being outside. And I did this wonderful, what was for me was this wonderful practice where I'd sit by the edge of the lake and I'd connect with each one of my senses. First, I'd sort of close my eyes and just listen to what I was hearing, and then open my eyes and like focus on what I was seeing, and then focus on what my skin was feeling, and one by one layer into these different sensory experiences until I began to sort of really kind of develop the ability to have a more holistic way of being with what was around me in a way that I had never even thought was available to me before.
And it's amazing, isn't it? Time after time we hear the power of the natural world to enable that sort of knowing and that sort of understanding. And it does feel like I mean, I'm biased, and we're biased because we read a lot of books and we spend a lot of time outdoors. That's the nature of our community. But I do think that time outdoors allows you to develop a different understanding than even meditating indoors and doing.
Yes. I think that is completely right, Tim. And for me, it was part of maybe perhaps in some ways the most important in sort of spiritual part of my journey of all was, I started off just like we do in mainstream thinking in our dominant culture, just sort of starting from the basis of me being somehow separate from nature, sort of with a capital N or whatever, and in fact, that's, if you look up the word nature in the dictionary, the meaning they'll give you is essentially what is not human. I mean, they'll actually define it as stuff that isn't actually human. I mean, so there's this deep understanding that there's humans and there's nature, and then there's deep understanding we have in our culture that there's the mind and the body, and those are kind of separate. And part of my intellectual discovery was to see that all of these distinctions we made are completely false. They're just part of a myth of basically of a particular worldview that is not actually grounded in science. We think it's scientific, but it's actually completely unscientific from what science, modern science actually tells us. But part of this journey for me in this kind of deeper layer was as I began to realize, oh, I am actually embodied. And actually, for me, what was very important in that was these traditional Chinese practices like Qigong and Tai Chi, because I started to become aware that it's not that I have a body or I want to develop a better relationship with my body, but I am an embodied presence. And those practices you can almost like feel like your identity shifting from the mind having a body to the body saying, basically, I have a mind, a very, very different kind of center of gravity, if you will. And from that, and that connection with nature that we were talking, I began to realize that it's not that, I began to see life itself, not as some separate, wonderful thing that evolved on Earth billions of years ago, but I began to see myself, my very existence, as being part of this unfolding of life on Earth. And that shifted my identity. And it's still a process I'm working on. It's something I go to again and again in meditations and all kinds of different practices I do. But this kind of allowing identity to become really one with life. There's this wonderful quote from Albert Schweitzer. There's when I came across it, it just completely, almost like transformed me. And I've really embodied it in so much of how I look at things. And he says at one point, I am life that wills to live in the midst of life that wills to live. And it's like this recognition, not being separate, but each of us is like a manifestation of life. And with that identity, it begins to shift everything about how we see everything what's going on around us, how we see the destruction taking place to the natural world. Like we begin to see that this whole notion of somebody who's maybe tagged an environmentalist. What a ridiculous name that is. It's not like there's an environment. That's part of our mainstream culture. It's like, oh, those environmentalists, they're the ones who focus on the environment, the stuff out there, like against that wallpaper. No, it's actually, this is not the environment. This is our lived existence and all of the interactions around it.
So it's so powerful. And what I love about your book is it explains for me, and I know for a lot of other readers, because I've heard from people, that it explains things that we've kind of got this vague sense of, like the separation of human and nature. But you piece it all back together, and I love how you sort of excavate this idea that actually for humans and civilizations to emerge, we had to create some separation, and that now our greatest challenge is getting past that and putting ourselves back together with life and with the natural world, and recognize that there are no separations, that we are, we are just stardust, aren't we? We're out with
Well, I think that's right. And one of the crucial concepts that I began to realize as I was putting together that book, The Web of Meaning, is a concept of integration. Because oftentimes, if we're talking to somebody, who's maybe coming from mainstream ways of thinking, and we talk about we're all one, or there is no separation. And oftentimes they'll kind of scoff at that. Say, come on, give me a break. It all sounds nice, but I mean, if I take out a gun and shoot you, you're dead. I'm not. Like, of course we're separate. Like, I mean, and in every which way you get those kind of responses. And this is where this concept of integration gets to be so vitally important, because what we begin to realize with integration, and I kind of define integration really as being, just in simple terms, a sense of unity with differentiation. And that's the whole point, because it holds these two concepts in one, is the sense that actually we are all connected in these very profound ways with all of life, and we're all separate too. But that separation doesn't mean that there's a fundamental separation. It means that we're differentiated. And in just the same way, like I as a human being, I've got roughly like 40 trillion cells here in my body. And all of those cells basically have my DNA. They all work together to help me be, to enable me to be what I am moment to moment. My thoughts, my breathing, my expressions, everything. At the same time, those cells are very separate. Like a nerve cell and going from my brain to my spine or whatever, it's totally different from a heart cell. That's all about pumping, and all these cells do their things differently. They're totally different from each other, and they're part of an integrated organism. And there's a different spectrum of separation and unity, depending on which scale you look at, from a particular cell to an organism, to a species, to a community, to all of humanity, to all of life. But in each case, there are those layers. And of course, we can just focus on the separation, which is what our dominant worldview tells us to do. And when we do that, that's when we begin to lose a sense of meaning in life. And that's part of the reason why our culture has these epidemics of loneliness and alienation and depression and suicide and all the terrible things. I call them just diseases of despair, because we're told that we are separate. And so the more we focus on our separation, the more we lose meaning. In fact, one of the, in the book, The Web of Meaning, I actually kind of define meaning itself basically as being a function of connection. That it's once we turn our attention to the connections between things that meaning opens up. And that's what one of the crucial lessons. It's not like, the people who say there's no meaning are wrong, and the people who say there is meaning are right. It's more like we can choose to open up to the meaning that's already there. A little bit like, sort of if you have a radio, you can turn it off. Or like an old-fashioned radio where you can sort of tune it to a wavelength. All those radio signals are out there. And you can just turn the radio off and say, those radio signals, a bunch of bullshit. There's nothing. But you can turn it on, and even then you might hear static. But then if you tune it to the right frequency, suddenly you hear the music or the person talking. Similarly, if we can attune to the frequency of what's going on around us, we tune into that meaning that's waiting to be experienced.
Wow, that's such a powerful metaphor, isn't it, about tuning in? And I love in the book how you bring in that voice of the mainstream, don't you? It's right there in the book. You talk about Uncle Bob who collars you at the party, and yeah, come on, that's not the way it works. And I think that's so powerful, because I'm sure so many of us are on our own journey and coming to these sort of conclusions, but it's like it feels too big to be able to share that.
Yes.
Is that why you wanted to bring that to recognize a different voice within this? It's part of recognizing the whole, isn't it?
That's exactly right, Tom. And I think it helped for me that I did have this trajectory in my life that we talked about earlier on, because I spent the first half of my life believing totally what our mainstream culture told us. I didn't know there were other alternative ways to make sense of things. And so, as you say, like essentially this book, The Web of Meaning, opens up with this scene. And as I said, I grew up in England. It was like the scene is like sort of a tea party in England. And, you know, these folks are going around a family gathering and they're saying, oh, the world's screwed up. We need to do things differently. And then Uncle Bob turns up and says, let me tell you, when you've been around the block a few times like I have, you know, like everyone's selfish. Let's just face it. And, you know, all these good ideas you have, they're not going to work because basically capitalism, you know, is like it harnesses that selfishness and makes things work. So and, you know, all these ideas about being one with nature, it's technology that's given us what given us all this progress, and that's what we're going to use to solve it. So you get that. And of course, what happens, we've all experienced these conversations, and what happens is everything like sort of shuts down, all the energy goes down, and you kind of don't quite know where to even respond. And okay, well, forget that idea. And like, and so the whole conversation ends, you know, how's little Jenny doing with her dancing lessons? Because that's all that's left. And not that there's anything wrong with little Jenny learning a dancing, that's great, but you know, so what, in a way, the whole book is a response to Uncle Bob. And the point is that Uncle Bob is within each of us. And even after I spent all these years with my own practices and writing this, I still have Uncle Bob, you know, as a voice, as a part of me, because I grew up, you know, we get deeply conditioned by where we grow up, by our culture. And the thing is, it's not a matter of trying to transcend it or leaving it behind or destroying those parts of ourselves. But what we can do is begin to learn that that is part of who we are. And we can begin to turn even to those Uncle Bobs within ourselves with compassion and recognizing, okay, that's kind of that part of me that's conditioned, but it doesn't have to be all of me. And it doesn't mean that that part is right. And in fact, that's a lot of what I'm doing in this book, is showing that these ways of connecting with meaning are not in any way anti-scientific. Like when I was starting this whole process I was describing to you, this kind of search for my own meaning, I was absolutely dedicated to not just taking something on faith, not just listening to some guru who might be, you know, have like a powerful personality, who's saying like, oh, I'm in touch with oneness, follow me. And like, no, I wanted to really let my reason be fully there as I was understanding these things. So rather than looking at some sort of opposition between reason and emotion, I was looking for an understanding that again integrated both the reason, my reason, and my intuition, what felt right. I didn't want, if somebody told me this is how it is, like Richard Dawkins says, it's all about selfish genes, there's nothing else left to know about. Well, my reason might get that, but it didn't feel right to me. There's something it was missing. And there are some things that might feel nice, but my reason didn't go. But I began to realize you don't have to make that split. What modern science shows us is that this deep connection of meaning is actually what is real, that it's the connections between things that are often more important than the things themselves. So the point about that Uncle Bob within us is that those voices of Uncle Bob, it's not just that they are ultimately maybe destructive and give us a sense of separation, but modern science shows us that they're plain wrong. After hundreds of years from the scientific revolution onwards, there was this sort of sense, you know, in the 17th century, people were just discovering science. There was a lot of stuff they didn't know, but some of those ideas got so embedded in our culture that we're basically believing in our mainstream culture, sort of quasi proto-science that's in some cases like 400 years old, rather than what modern science is actually showing us.
And I'm glad you use the culture word. I mean, you talk about culture a lot in the book, don't you? But I think that's, so having articulated that our greatest challenge is reconnection. We do that in the face of, like you say, 400 years of dominant culture, but more dominant culture. You know, yeah. There are. If you look at how Robin contrasts indigenous wisdom with
Right.
Christianity, and she's got Sky Woman and Eve as
Right.
completely two different sides of it. It's such a challenge, isn't it, to try and change things in the face of such a dominant worldview. And that, I guess that's what you're trying to do, is articulate an alternative worldview and challenge that dominant worldview. But
Yeah.
getting that to have traction, now that is
Yeah.
such a challenge, isn't it?
It is. It's very hard. And, you know, uh, it leads to this sense of, well, can we even do it? Is it like overwhelming? And especially when we look at the ecological destruction taking place in the world right now, and we look at this incredible dominance of these transnational corporations and the billionaires and the rise of neoliberalism and all of these things, it's quite easy to really just fall into the sense of despair and say, like, for all of those of us who are trying to offer a different way of looking at things, that's like so tiny compared to this kind of onslaught, this juggernaut of destruction. And I guess, you know, I'm basically, it's very difficult for me too. I feel that every day. I mean, I'm not somebody who goes around saying it's all going to end up just fine. You know, don't worry about it. We're on this cusp and it's all going to change to the positive. I don't know. And I feel anybody who claims they do know is missing this incredible mystery of the nonlinearity of all the stuff that takes place around us. We can't predict what's going to happen. But what we do know is that just by giving words to a different way of being, by living into a different way of being, by actually putting our own life into that sort of transformed way and focusing on connection, we can be part of a transformation. And what does give me hope is this sense I get of how many millions and millions of people around in the world feel the same way, and they see what's going on. And as human beings, basically this dominant culture has to sort of condition us from infancy onwards, from the age of like 2 or 3, when we start to get access to first advertising and stuff like that. The whole dominant culture has to condition us to shed what is our true human instinct, which is our true human instinct is to connect, is to want to be part of community, to want to be part of life. And Robin Wall Kimmerer, as you say in a book, Braiding Sweetgrass, talks about that so deeply and looks at those deep indigenous roots of that, of what that deep connection really means. But the dominant culture has to like wipe that out. But all of us still have that within us. And that's the hope, that we can actually connect with each other in ways that can lead, the connections themselves can lead to something transformative. You know, as I'm sure most people in your group are well aware of this notion of the sort of the mycorrhizal fungal network. If you walk in a forest, under the earth itself is this incredible network that the tree's roots are connecting with. And that biologist Suzanne Simard has talked about it as the Wood Wide Web, right? Like where they're not just communicating with each other through this fungal network underground, but they're even actually sharing their resources together. So the big mother trees might be like offering carbon and or other resources to other trees at the edge of the forest, or whatever that might be. Similarly, this kind of movement for transformation is very much like that mycorrhizal fungal network. You don't see it every day when you turn on the news or look at the news on the internet, and the headlines usually about something disastrous that's taking place and some horrible politician who's like corrupt, taking money from billionaires and the elites and doing all these terrible things. What we don't see when we read that is these kind of connections, like the connections happening right now that are happening in millions of different places all around the world all the time, where people are sharing their sense with each other. This is what really matters.
It reminds me of a half-remembered quote about revolutions, and it goes something like, revolutions don't happen when you realize that the system is broken. They happen when you realize that everyone else realizes it as well.
Mm,
And it's that power of
yeah.
shared knowledge and understanding. But it still feels so fragmented. Every day I come across absolutely fascinating new sproutings of new connection and knowledge and alternative futures. And there are threads that join them, but it feels that those threads are a bit loose, and like that we need something to stitch it all together. We don't we can't even arrive on a name to bond it together. It's and I guess I think about how religions and things emerged. They did have like a worldview that they could propagate, and that it was simple for everyone to understand. And it sort of feels like we're all trying to make up that thing, and no one's quite getting there, and everyone's desperately trying to come up with their own. And we're not
Right.
getting that point about we're all going in the same direction.
Well, I'm actually really glad you raised that point, because I agree with you. And that's something I was sensing for years as I was doing my own research and feeling just like you say. And of course, the way actual complex systems work is this notion of what's called reciprocal causality, where all the different parts within a complex system, and when I say a complex system, that's anything to do with, like, say, an organism, or like an ecosystem, or also a human culture. So all the different parts affect the whole, and the whole affects the parts too. And when we're thinking of human culture, what that whole is really like a dominant story. So our dominant story of our current culture is like we're all separate. Humans are separate from nature, and that, like, it's a story like Uncle Bob believes in, or whatever. And so, as I was doing all this research, I came across this vision that more and more people are giving name to, that they call an ecological civilization. And as soon as I heard that phrase, something went off in my mind, because of this is it. This captures it, because what an ecological civilization really refers to, that phrase, is looking at this idea of our entire civilization needs to be transformed. We can't just sort of fix the economics, or just, fix the technology, or fix this or that. We actually have to transform the very roots of our civilization. So that's the civilization part. And ecological captures this idea that we actually can come up with a civilization that is based on the same principles that allow ecologies to have been so successful and resilient, sometimes over millions of years, with no matter what happens to them, to remain resilient and strong. So the idea behind an ecological civilization is really just to respond to what you're talking about, to let all these different movements and people working on this stuff, to realize that they can be part of this overall overarching transformation. Like, ultimately, the idea is to recognize if our dominant culture is based on basically this destructive forces of exploitation and extraction and wealth accumulation, to envisage what would it be like if we were to actually build a civilization on life-affirming principles, where the very foundation of the civilization was to set the conditions for all humans to flourish on a regenerated earth. And then starting from that, like, how would economics look in that? How would urban design look? How would agriculture look? How would technology look? How would education look? Every single aspect of a civilization would actually look different. But what's so amazing is that people have already come up with the ways in which each of these different parts work. It's just not, it hasn't so far been given that name of an ecological civilization, but that's what we're all working on, is moving towards this life-affirming civilization. And that's actually what I'm working on right now for my next book, is actually going to be called Future Flourishing: Pathways Toward an Ecological Civilization. And the hope is that it does help people to realize that, who are working on all these different aspects of this transformation, that we're actually all working on it together.
Wow. Well, I look forward to that one. That sounds amazing. And I think that's it sounds so powerful, and I'm personally drawn towards Kate Raworth's donut economics. I'm
Yeah.
working on that here in Leeds, and you know, Kate talks about a thriving society and a flourishing society, and doing that alongside people working on climate change, it does feel that sort of climate change is a bit more of a reductionist approach. Oh, something has gone wrong here, we can go and fix that but it feels like playing whack-a-mole with symptoms rather than addressing causes. And when you talk about that ecological civilization, that's about getting to the heart of it and to the
Yes.
cause of it.
I think you're so right about that, Tim. And I think the best way of really understanding climate change, and actually George Monbiot, I love what he says. He says we shouldn't call it climate change. It's such an anodyne way of describing it. It's a little bit like having like a country invade you and you call them unwanted guests or whatever. He said, let's call it a climate emergency. It's a climate breakdown. And yeah, and there is power to words. So I often like to try to give it. But the whole point about it, whatever we call it, is we can think of it a little bit like if a patient, a human person, is very sick and they've got something deeply wrong with them and they're having a high temperature. Well, you know, you need to treat the temperature because the temperature itself can kill them if you don't respond to it. But to think that by bringing their temperature down, you've actually solved the problem is as much a mistake as thinking that by just dealing with the climate, even if we found some solution, which we're far from, obviously, but even if there were some solution that could just bring the climate, the sort of average temperature back down again without doing the other things, it would be similar to that notion. You're not actually treating the underlying cause, which is this ecological devastation that our current civilization is causing around the world on account of ultimately this worldview of separation, which is manifested in this global economic system of global capitalism, of like a growth-based system, so it's forced to keep growing and growing and growing. So those are the fundamentals we have to change. And I think Kate Raworth's donut economics is one of the very best methodologies to understand that. And just the very simple notion of the donut, you know, to find the ways in which we can be within our parameter, like our external barriers, but like bring the minimum up to the level of what is a decent common needs for everybody. It's a wonderful framework, and one that I'll be describing in detail in this upcoming book that I'm working on. And the other very important notion about that is degrowth. Yeah, people like Jason Hickel and many others are part of the degrowth movement, which is really beginning to get more and more legs, especially in Europe. This recognition that because degrowth is nothing. Oftentimes people think, well, look at what happened. We had a recession with COVID. That was bad. Why do we don't want degrowth? But it's very different from that. Degrowth is looking at changing the entire structure and system of our economy, so that it's not requiring growth in order for people to basically live inside the donut, just as Kate Raworth talks about.
Just as you're talking there, it's sort of there's a real parallel between the hedonic treadmill that we're all on, you know, constantly looking to satisfy our desires and this growth treadmill that the economy is on, and it strikes me that the two are so closely related that you need to change both of them together, because one drives the other, and we've got an awful lot of these feedback loops that are there within the system that we need to break. Can you see any pressure points or opportunities to break this cycle? Where do you think think the most opportunity? Because you talked before about change not being linear, but that there are opportunities for change within that, aren't there?
Yes, I think if we look at the sort of the more system-wide, that sort of growth-based sort of treadmill we're on, I think we need to recognize that, like each of us, as you say, are on this hedonic treadmill, which is coming from the transnational corporations that are now dominating our world. And I think something that we need to focus a lot more attention on than even people in more activist circles actually do, is realize that until we put very strict brakes and controls on the power of these global transnational corporations, we're not going to get anywhere. Because they basically, to just give you some examples, if you look at the 100 largest economies in the world today, 69 of the 100 largest, they are not countries, but are these transnational corporations. And they basically have control of like virtually every aspect of our sort of public human life, whether it's not just economics or finance, but media and agriculture and technology and basically everything, and mining and you name it, trade. And the thing is that these corporations, they might be filled with all kinds of good, caring people who want to be doing good for the world. This is not pointing fingers at the actual people who populate these corporations, but the corporations themselves as systems are shareholder owned. And according to our current system, they have to keep not just showing a profit, but increasing their profits at the fastest rate possible to maximize their shareholder returns. And the people who head up these corporations, if they don't do that, they can be sued for not maximizing their profits. And what that means is that for all the good things we might hear from corporation, all the greenwashing, these companies saying, yeah, we're going to become carbon neutral by 2030 or 2050, whatever they're talking about, they're always going to do that within the overall structure of maximizing profits, which means ultimately causing further destruction, consuming the Earth's resources. And that is their number one goal. So we have to put brakes on that. And people barely even talk about that. It's almost like I call it sometimes the elephant in the room. It's so big that people say, oh, look, we can't change that. So let's just kind of try to work with the corporations to make things work better. That doesn't work like that, because they're designed to kind of incorporate all what might seem good ultimately, and then transform it into more profit maximization. But there are simple ways which it can be fixed. There are, some people might already know about what's known as the triple bottom line, or like you can choose, a company can choose to be a B corporations or a benefit corporation, where you can change your legal charter to actually require you to have a triple bottom line, not just profits, but also people and planets. So incorporating optimizing for all constituencies that you're relating to. Now, so far that's had no impact on the world because it's a choice. And very few companies choose it, and none of the massive corporations would even consider it. But imagine if the government of the world got together and made it that these massive corporations can only have their charters renewed if they change the charter to this triple bottom line, and maybe like a panel of chosen by sortition, so not other regulators who are just part of the corrupt cycle, but an actual panel of citizens decide every 5 years if these companies actually have met that triple bottom line. And so if they haven't met the bottom line of people and planet, then they could be facing like social bankruptcy or an ecological bankruptcy rather than just financial bankruptcy. And just that one change alone would have a fundamental impact on the direction of our future. I'm not saying that one change would be enough in itself, but it gives a sense of how things we take for granted don't necessarily have to be taken for granted. But right now, there's barely even a movement. I mean, there's a few people working towards these ideas, but you hardly even see mention of it, even in progressive ideas or whatever, where something like that is what we need to actually turn things around. So that's one example of a leverage point that I think could take a lot more attention.
Yeah, it's powerful, isn't it? I have to ask. We've got just less than a quarter of an hour left. Jeremy and I have been rattling on. Guys, if you want to ask questions, feel free to get them in. I mean, I can keep going all night. We are favorite topic here. So I'm going to rattle on, but if you want to ask questions, throw them into the chat. We'll get them out there. Just on the mandating B Corps, God, that would be brilliant. I do wonder if sort of a halfway house might be to change the taxation status of B Corps, so that, you know, recognizing that B Corps don't put as many externalities out into the system for society to clean up, so they shouldn't be taxed as heavily on the things that they sell. And if you could take VAT away from B Corps, then all of a sudden you start to use the system, the market system we've got. And there's nothing wrong with markets. It's the acquisitive nature of capitalism that's I think this is what you're talking about, is recognizing the systems that we've got and using them in ways to drive positive action. Rather than, you know, you're not talking about getting rid of everything and going living in mud huts. There's a way through.
Yes, that's actually a great idea that you just said that, Tim. And it actually makes me think of a model of change that is really valuable, which I'll just take you through. It's simple to explain. It's called the three horizons model of change. And yeah, I can see you're aware of it. So, and basically the three horizons model is a simple notion of, imagine you're on a journey. Like, say you're hiking, there's this place you want to get to, so a long way away. Well, your first horizon you can think of as where your next step is. You know, you're looking down, and you need to make sure the next step is the right thing. You need to be aware of that. Otherwise, you can trip over or get caught in a bog or whatever it might be. The second horizon can think of as like sort of what you see out there in the distance, kind of maybe just beyond the sort of mountains you see, like something looks totally different. And the third horizon is like so far out there that you're not even seeing it, but it's potential to get to where you want to go. And the idea is thinking of change in that way. Like so the first horizon is basically relates to just keeping things going, making things a little bit better, like, say, you know, investing in more green technology or whatever, or trying to make things not quite as bad. The second horizon is transforming things a little bit, but it might be still within the same system. And that idea that you just came up, like something like changing the tax status for benefit or B corporations. It's a great idea, that second horizon. So the system is still the system, but you're doing something that moves towards that third horizon. And the third horizon might be what I was just describing, like no corporations can even be chartered without that. But the wonderful thing about this notion of these three horizons is that we can recognize that there are certain things we can focus on in the short term, some of which take us away from that second or third horizon. They go in the wrong direction. So like, say, something like somebody might say, oh, we should do geoengineering to deal with the climate. Well, you might say, well, that might be needed. We should focus on that. But that takes us away from the direction that we really want to go in. But that kind of change that you just described is very doable. That could be passed in a parliament like next year. And it takes us closer to that third horizon that we're really looking for. And I see that Gemma actually put in the chat that wonderful idea of, you know, either 4-day week or universal basic income as potentially being part of the solution. And Gemma, I could not agree more. In fact, you know, when Tim was just asking me what are the sort of some of the big lever points, and I was talking about the corporations, basically the next thing almost in my mind to talk about would be the idea of a universal basic income for everybody. And for people who aren't aware of it, the idea of universal basic income is saying that basically saying that every single person, and it could be in a country, and ultimately it could be a global thing, every person is given an income, a reliable income, a monthly income simply not for doing something, but simply as a function of being alive, that is enough income to get the basics that they need essentially to meet the bottom layer of Kate's donuts economics, the basics for food security and shelter and education and health and all that stuff. And this is not instead of, by the way, having social systems that offer that. It's not like saying, oh, there should be no social welfare, just basic income. But it's in addition to that, giving people enough so that they don't need to basically sell their lives, sell their bodies and their life energy in order to make enough money just to live. That's part of the sort of capitalist sort of deal that came around only the last few hundred years with the enclosure movement. It started in England, actually, when peasants were like kicked off their land and suddenly forced to sell their work in order just to stay alive. So a UBI, universal basic income, is one of the most powerful levers to change that. And people often argue against that and say, oh, people are lazy and you can't do that, like nothing will get done anymore. And the opposite is true. In pilot programs where they've actually offered something like a universal basic income, all the things that lead to increased quality of life actually happen more. People actually use less drugs. They use less alcohol. They actually get to be more entrepreneurial. They get to spend more time on doing what they actually care about. And it begins to build true community bonding and community health. So it's actually one of the most, again, powerful ways we can do that. And often people say, oh, we can't afford something like that. And actually, when you look at where our money actually goes to all these incredible, massive profits for these transnational corporations, and there's trillions of dollars that then gets stashed away in tax havens, and trillions of dollars, once again, every year spent in military equipment to help to destroy our ecology too. All of those things show that there's actually way more than enough sort of wealth that is created now in our society, where a universal basic income could easily be affordable.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because so even just in that brief conversation, we've mapped out a pathway to a future in which we can all flourish, and it's like we could do what no civilization has ever done. You know, history is full of civilizations which have peaked, wiped themselves out, and disappeared. So this is where I start from. Is a hugely exciting time, and yet I know there's already movements who've moved past that and said, well, it's never going to work. And you get people, you get movements like Jem Bendell and deep adaptation, and it's like, well, civilization is going to collapse, so just start dealing with collapse. And I know you've got a much more positive approach into, you've got your movement is the deep transformation movement. So clearly you have a wellspring of hope within you that's driving you forwards, haven't you? Where do you find that?
Yeah, no, I know it's a big question. It's one really I wrestle with every day, because even though I've actually written articles that somewhat critiqued Jem Bendell's ideas about deep adaptation, the notion that collapse is inevitable, I share a lot of his way of understanding what's going on, a lot of his sense of seeing how our civilization in its current form is taking us to collapse. So the only point of departure really I have from Jem is, I think more than anything, a realization of coming from systems understanding, and a lot of my books really look at what we understand from systems thinkers, is the non-linearity of complex systems. It basically means when you look at any complex system, it could be as simple as a cell or an ecosystem or marketplaces or whatever. You can never really predict what's going on by simply looking at the straight line and saying it's going to continue in that way, because the way those interactions happen are such that they are by nature unpredictable. Now, so what that gives me, it doesn't mean that if I had to lay odds on whether we're going to collapse or whether we're going to end up moving towards an ecological civilization or whatever it might be, the actual sort of percentage odds might not look so good. I'm not saying like, oh yeah, well, we just got to keep, we're getting there.
Don't give us a number. Don't
Right.
give us a number.
Right.
Please don't give us a number.
I don't even give myself a number. I couldn't. But the point is, what I do know, and what we all know, is that things happen that we don't expect. When Greta Thunberg sitting there just a couple of years ago in front of the Swedish Parliament, just a schoolgirl by herself with a banner, nobody, I mean, you'd have been laughed out of the square if you'd said, oh, one day, you know, that person will spark a movement of children, of school children, like millions around the world. She'll be speaking, you know, at the EU and at like the big mega event. Like, no, come on, forget him. We don't know what can actually happen, but what we do know is that each of us has our own lives. Each of us, and most people who'd be listening to this conversation, is in a place of relative privilege in the world, with relative power, more than probably the average person of the 8 billion people around us in the world. And we do know that we can choose each day to put our energy into what is life affirming. And we know that basically once our identity expands to include all of life, like that Albert Schweitzer quote I started off with earlier, I am life that wills to live in the midst of life that wills to live. We know that life is calling on us to do everything that is within our existence for its benefit. And so that's what we know. And it doesn't matter, I think part of what it is even goes beyond a sense of hope. Which is this kind of has a sense of a prognosis about the outcome, to almost like just a sense of just giving yourself to it, just surrendering yourself to the mystery, just saying, I'm putting myself into this. I'm not going to attach to an outcome. I know what I want. We can have intentions and move towards that. But if we start to attach to an outcome, we can end up getting so demoralized each time we don't get what we want that we end up like fighting against it, or we can get like caught in the sense of despair. But I believe that life is calling on us to feel the pain, to feel that sense, all the analysis that Jen Bendel explained so well. Life is calling us to recognize that and to feel it, but not to get so pulled down into it that we give up, but to say, take that energy, turn it around, put it into what is life affirming. And I do believe that if enough of us can actually answer that call and do it together, because what's crucial about that is not just all of us doing our separate things, but looking at what others are doing, working with them to create these kind of self-organized systemic change. I do believe there's a possibility that we can transform where we need to go. Certainly, before our entire society collapses. We're going to go through years and maybe decades of a sense of unraveling, a sense of things really falling apart. But that it's when things actually begin to fall apart that the freedom arises to then actually weave them together into a different way. So we can actually see the very unraveling of our society itself. And I'm not saying that's something we want to happen, but the unraveling of our society itself actually allows it to be retied, rewoven into more life-affirming structures and designs. That's where, if I have a sense of whatever we might call hope, that's where it comes from.
Wow, that's powerful. So I guess one last question, and you talk a lot in the book about culture and movement, and a lot of that comes from people who are able to articulate a vision and tell stories about that. And you're doing that yourself. You talked about people like Greta Thunberg and Kate Raworth. Who do you think is articulating a really positive vision that we can look towards at the moment and say, actually, that's something that I could get behind, and that's something that I want to see in the future?
Beyond Kate Raworth, Donut Economics, which I'm sure everyone's aware of, maybe there's two current thinkers that I'd recommend people take a really good look at. One is Jason Hickel, whom I mentioned earlier, who wrote a book a couple of years ago called Less is More. And it's a really great articulation of how some of the, like what degrowth actually means and how we can move. We've got everything that is needed to move towards that's like a truly sustainable future. And another writer I really recommend is somebody who writes a lot about the commons. His name is David Bollier, Bollier. And he wrote a book a couple of years ago with a co-author, Silke Helfrich, called Free, Fair, and Alive. And that is another transformative book because sometimes we understand about the commons, we think it's some sort of medieval notion of people sharing a pasture where their sheep are grazing, whatever. But the commons is it's actually an incredibly powerful form of organizing that started as hunter-gatherers for us as humans, like way before agriculture even came up. Is like the way in which we as humans can self-organize to actually not have hierarchical organization as we are so used to in our world today, but actually working together in ways that are very powerful and productive and actually feel alive and meaningful. And what he shows is that the commons is a way forward in virtually every aspect of what an ecological civilization would be about. So that's a book that really kind of transformed my understanding and is very inspiring for people to take a look at.
Wow. Marvelous. I honestly, I could carry this on all night. But we're going to have to bring it to an end. Jeremy, honestly, it's been an honor and a pleasure. I've absolutely loved our conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your thoughts with us. Thank you for the book. It's pretty brilliant. I'm very much looking forward to the Ecological Civilization book. You know, it's such important work moving us in the right direction. So thank you so much. And yeah, well, you know, you talk in the book about gaze and people's attention being on something draws other people's gaze, and I think that's what you're doing. You're drawing people's gaze to a better future. So thank you so much. It's so important and so powerful.
Yeah,
I'm emotional even saying thank you.
Really, thank you, Tim. It's been a really just a super pleasurable conversation. Thanks for everyone who shared some of their perspectives in the chats. And yeah, love what you're all doing, and hope to see you all someday next time I come visit in the UK.
Amazing. Well, you'd be most welcome.
So thanks to you all there.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.